Thank you, Amy, and rest of the team leading us this morning. So we're gonna dive backwards a little bit. Today is our last sermon directly from the book of Luke. And so we're going to kind of wrap that up. And then next week, I'm going to begin showing the crossover between Luke and Isaiah. Then we'll have a break as we look through the Psalms, some Psalms, and then dive into Isaiah. It's going to take several weeks to get to Isaiah. It's going to take us a few weeks of unpacking, preparing our hearts to actually go into a book, a prophecy book like that that's going to be challenging for us. And so it is my hope that we will all be great Bible students and prepared to do that. But going back, I want us to look at, here's what Luke, the author Luke, this Greek physician traditionally who did the research and unpacked this and wrote this, the book of Luke and the book of Acts in our Bibles. And so I'm going to go back and to start back at Luke chapter 1. Don't worry, I'm not starting the sermon series over. We're just going to go back and look at the purpose. Luke 1, starting in verse 3. It seemed good to me also, having followed all things closely for some time past, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, that you may have certainty concerning the things that you have been taught. Now, certainty of what things? Concerning what things that he has been taught? Certainly the events that have happened, the life experiences of Jesus of Nazareth and of his followers. Certainly that's there. But I think more significantly, when you look at the book of Luke, the purpose, the main theme in the book of Luke is to unpack who Jesus is. Who is this guy? And what does it mean? What do his truth claims mean? How do they unpack with us? What do they mean? How do we live those out? What are the consequences of that? And this was Luke's goal, and it clearly is Jesus' goal. It's what Jesus does all through the book of Luke, is explain and try to teach who he is, make it as clear as possible. By the time he gets to chapter 18, he's not even being subtle or sneaky or in any way mysterious. He's just straight out saying it. Now, of course, his followers still don't get it. They never seem to get him. And we're even going to see that even after all of this, there's still going to be some confusion on their part. But that's okay. That's how it works when you got people, right? So Luke has given Theophilus and us enough of the details, enough of the reality of the experience and the significance of the life and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now that's going to be the interesting sticking point. So for those of you who maybe you were raised in a different denominational background or that kind of thing, or just a different kind of church, I don't know, but sometimes the passage, the sermon, lends itself more to something that is like very rational, very logical, very reasonable. And I want you to know, so that's going to be part of our conversation today. Now, that in no way steals from the mystery and the art and the poetry of the gospel. People who have been Christians for a long time know that you take those two things and those are integrated, this very clear, rational series of truth claims that Jesus and his followers have made and what they mean. Now, then taking that and taking it from something that's a little bit more like laying pipe and turning it into something that is more like singing praise requires us as we grow to understand that. But that's what we're going to be looking at today, is this idea. Many of you may not even know, if you're new to Christianity or new to the church or even new to this church, that Christianity is a rational faith. The claims made of Jesus and his followers are rational, they are reasonable, they are open to investigation, and even open to challenge. And so we're going to look at some of those today as we discuss it. What happens is we see that these men and women go from being scared kids behind locked doors to suddenly, and in a very short amount of time, becoming courageous men and women who go out into the world and spread a good news message, a new message from God, that they go out and spread this into the world at the risk of their lives, at the cost of most of their lives. In fact, this is what's wild. When we come back to this, I'm going to unpack this some more, but I want you to imagine the significance of these people. They lived this. We'll come back to this, but understand, these men and women who wrote about this stuff, they lived this. And so this isn't like something they were told about. There wasn't some preacher telling them about it. They weren't having to read somebody else's writings about it. They lived it. Either Jesus lived and died and rose from the dead, or he didn't. And these men and women know. They know whether he did or didn't. And part of what we're going to do is evaluate how they responded to this news. So some of you may remember, if you were here at Rebecca Lisenby's wedding, that the fire alarms went off, okay? And what's interesting is, we were up here, and we were like, the fire alarms start going off, and no one really reacts. We knew there were people doing work in the kitchen, and there were people working in there, and we were like, oh, they probably accidentally set off the fire alarm. Something happened. It happens. No one moved. You know why? Because no one thought there was a fire. The fire alarm thought there was a fire. Nobody else did, right? The fire alarm's going nuts, flashing lights, beep, beep, all kinds of horrific things are going off. It's perfect for a wedding, by the way. So that happened several times, if I remember correctly. Here's what would have changed everything. I want you to imagine if the people who were working in the kitchen came running out of the kitchen in here screaming, everybody get out of the building, it's about to blow, right? Then you would have seen a different reaction. But what happened is we were in here celebrating that, and the people who know whether or not we're in danger, they seem to be okay. They don't seem worried. They're not coming in here panicked. And they know whether or not we're in danger. We don't. We just have a fire alarm telling us we are, which of course we dismiss because we're Americans. And so that's we're not going to panic about that until someone who actually knows whether or not we're in danger makes the proclamation or acts in such a way that indicates, yep, absolutely, we are in danger. It is reasonable. It's a reasonable way to react. So now what actually happened? That's what we're going to unpack now. What actually happened 2,000 years ago after this Jewish rabbi is executed by the Romans, buried in a borrowed tomb that everyone knew about, and then turns up not in the tomb on Sunday morning. What happens? Well, remember last week, Luke 24, 36 through 38, as they were talking about these things, Jesus himself stood among them and said, peace to you. But they were startled and frightened and thought they saw a spirit. He said to them, why are you troubled? Why do doubts arise in your hearts? So in Luke, all the way up through chapter 24, we've now seen a couple of appearances, the post-death appearances of Jesus, with the people to Emmaus, the guys to Emmaus, and then the disciples here. We've heard about another one. So what I want to do is I want to go back and unpack all of these appearances of Jesus. There's maybe 12 of them. We're going to unpack all of them as we take a moment to examine what happened after Jesus was resurrected, who saw him, under what conditions. So we're going to start in John chapter 20. There are some controversies, no surprise, about these appearances and in what order they take place and what days they happen and that kind of stuff. But we're going to mostly skim through some of that. If that's interesting to you, you can look at it. This first passage, John 20, verses 11 through 18, is what we're going to look at. We unpacked this in a sermon, an entire sermon dedicated just to this passage way back on November 3rd, 2019. So if you want to go back and get more detail, it's a fun little sermon. All right, so in John 20, starting in verse 11, but Mary stood weeping outside the tomb, and as she wept, she stooped to look into the tomb. So let me give you the background here. So Mary and the others, so apparently they go to the tomb, it's empty. There's two angels who tell them it's empty because Jesus is not here. They go back and tell the men. The men come back and they check, because obviously that's what men do. They got to go look at it to see if that's right. And they go and look, and sure enough, empty tomb. Peter and James, they come back. After they come back, that's apparently when two disciples decide they're going to head to Emmaus. So they decide they're going to head to Emmaus because obviously there's no more investigation to be done. Again, we laughed about, I don't know why they went to Emmaus, what they were thinking. The women, however, apparently go, we want to go check out the tomb and see what's going on, like what happened there. So the ladies all go back to the tomb. And that's where we pick up. Mary Magdalene is there with the other women. So she stoops in. She saw two angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and one at the foot. Way back in 2019, we unpacked the fact that this is clearly a reference to the altar, to the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat with the angels on both ends. Again, if that's interesting to you, go back and check that out. And they said to her, woman, why are you weeping? And she said to them, they have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him. Having said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing, but she did not know it was Jesus. And Jesus said to her, woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking? Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, Sir, if you have carried him away, tell him where you have laid him, and I will take him away. Now, is Jesus supernaturally hidden again? Just dressing so that it's tough to tell who he is? Is the sun shining in her eyes? I don't know. We'll find out when Dallas Jenkins presents it in The Chosen. So we'll find out how it happened. So I just want you to know, by the way, and I don't want to do a spoiler here. I'm actually kind of was torn about this. When I knew that I was going to be connected to that series, The Chosen, for all of its controversies and all that kind of stuff, was actually in the first episode. When they, if you've not seen it, I want to encourage you to do so. It's worthwhile. Is that in the opening episode, the very first episode, there's the confusion about who Mary is and all the things that are going on with her identity, and then Jesus speaks to her and he makes her known who she is and that he is significant by calling her name. That when everything else seems uncontrolled and tumultuous, Jesus says, Mary. And this is what stills the waters in her soul. At that moment, knowing that clearly the writer of this series was setting us up for this moment. And I think even warning you that it's coming won't ruin it. I think we'll still all be bawling like babies when this moment happens. When Jesus is risen from the tomb and she doesn't know who he is until, verse 16, Jesus says to her, Mary. She turned and said to him in Aramaic, Rabboni, which means teacher. This is a powerful scene. It was a powerful scene 2,000 years ago as Mary, the unchosen one, is chosen again by Jesus, so clearly with the usage of her name. Jesus goes out of his way post-resurrection to go back and claim this one. Meanwhile, and what must have been almost simultaneously, he is then going, as we see, the one with Mary. Oh, by the way, immediately after that, I think it has to be immediately after this. There's controversy about this, but in Matthew 28, we then see Jesus meet the group of women together. So I think he meets her, then they are on their way back, and he shows up for all of them in Matthew 28, verse 9. And behold, Jesus met them and said, Greetings. And they came up and took hold of his feet and worshiped him. Then Jesus said to them, Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me. So Jesus sends the boys to Galilee through the women. Now, again, remember, this is almost simultaneously. Jesus is going to two from the road to Emmaus to claim them, that there's just two. And yet he goes out of his way, walks with them, teaches them, has a meal with them, and then vanishes. Some point in this process, he also visits Peter. We don't know the details of that. We'll look at that next. So he mentions that at some point also he meets with James, though we don't have the narrative of either one of those. We see in Luke 24:34 saying, The Lord has risen indeed and has appeared to Simon. That's when the guys from Emmaus come back. The Apostle Paul unpacks this in 1 Corinthians 15. 1 Corinthians 15 is the Apostle Paul's usage of the resurrection to prove who Jesus is and that it really happened. And so in 1 Corinthians 15 is what he says, Then he appeared to Cephas, that's another name for Peter, then to the 12, then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. We do not have the narrative of him appearing just to Peter or just to James, or we may not have the narrative of him appearing to the 500, though that apparently happened. I think we do, and I'll explain that when we get there. But so the Apostle Paul is saying, of course there is a resurrection. Jesus was resurrected. If you don't believe Jesus is resurrected, here's 500 plus people who you can talk to about it, who saw it, who were there when it happened, who can give you that feedback. This is exactly what the purpose of this is to say, if you don't believe me, ask them. Because remember, Paul wasn't there for any of those. Now, we're going to unpack Paul's here in a minute, but he wasn't there for those. Then, of course, like we said, the Sunday afternoon, Emmaus, which is got to be also when he is meeting with the women. This is also when he talks to Mary Magdalene, somewhere in here. This is when he's talking to the ones from Emmaus. Sometime in here he talks to Peter. He's very busy for these hours of greeting and meeting with people. But here's what's wild. In shockingly small numbers. Just one in many cases. That Jesus has... I think this boggles my mind. What were Jesus' responsibilities post-resurrection? mean, what was happening in the universe? That Jesus Christ has resurrected from the dead. What's going on in the spiritual world? What's Satan up to during these hours? Surely Jesus has some big things to do. Can't you imagine? I imagine Jesus sitting at some giant spiritual board meeting where the decisions about the cosmic fate of the entire universe are being decided with post-resurrection Jesus as God is bestowing all authority on him, and his alarm going off and him going like, oh, I got to go. I'll be back in just a second. Vanishes, apparently goes and meets with two guys walking to Emmaus, vanishes, goes and appears and brings Mary, who he loves, back into the fold, these two men back into the fold. He meets with the 11 to correct their wrong thinking, to bring them back in. And then shows back up at this cosmic board meeting because his priority in the midst of all of this is still the one lost sheep. This is so Jesus to see this played out. This is not a change in character. This is who he is. On Luke and John chapter 20, on the Sunday evening, we mentioned this one, what Paul calls the 12, although there were actually only 11 at this point, or actually only 10 at this point. On the evening of that day, the first day of the week, the doors being locked where the disciples were for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." When he had said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Then the disciples were glad that when they saw the Lord. This is John clearly retelling the account that we saw in Luke. Last week, we looked at that in detail if you want to go back and get more instruction on that. Then in Luke 20, 1 week later, we get Jesus coming back clearly for one purpose, which is to show Thomas the truth. So Thomas has now gone a week without believing, even though everybody else believes. Jesus comes back for the one who seems to be uncertain or at least unclear, the single sheep yet again. If you want to go see this one unpacked, the discussion was on November 24th, 2019. You can go back to the website and listen to this sermon about this passage. 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them, although the doors were locked. Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hand. Put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe." And Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believed." The one, again, Thomas. Apparently, after that week, the disciples did in fact transfer locations from Jerusalem to Galilee. Personally, this is, I think, where the 500 come in. So why would Jesus send them to Galilee? He apparently can meet with them just fine in Jerusalem. That's not a problem. And why does he want to meet with them outdoors? Maybe it's because he has a lot more people there to talk about. I think that's what's going on here. I think Jesus sends them to Galilee for two reasons. One, to recreate that entire scripted skit with the Apostle Peter to restore Peter at the exact same place where he called Peter the first time. Again, a few weeks ago, we unpacked that. It is one of the most beautiful, heart-rending stories ever written anywhere, much less in the Bible. One of the most heart-rending stories ever as Jesus restores Peter. It's so beautiful, and I think that's part of why he wants them in Galilee, is he wants Peter out fishing, and he wants to restore Peter under those conditions. And I think it is very likely that Jesus also sent them to Galilee because he communicated with many of the other followers of his from Galilee. Many of the other people from that region. Remember, this is where 10, 20, 30,000, we don't know how many people, the feeding of the 5,000 men, this happened in this location. So you can imagine him going up on that mountain, or maybe on the mountain where he had fed the 5,000, or where he had given the Sermon on the Mount, or one of those other locations in there in the little hills and valleys of the Galilee region. And he had told them, however he did that, to meet him there. And so you can imagine hundreds gathering here in an outdoor space. I think this is where the 500 were that he's talking about here. So one, again, the Galilee breakfast, Peter being the lost sheep who he restores. Matthew 28, verse 16. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. And when they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. Now again, it's certainly plausible and possible that some of the 11 were still doubting. But I don't think it's likely. Again, these are the 11 who have already now seen him several times. They've seen him post-resurrection several times. They've engaged with him several times. They were all there when Thomas proved the wounds in Jesus, that this is who Jesus is. They've now seen Jesus eat. They've touched his body. They're very aware of who he is. So who would have doubted? I think it may be the hundreds of other followers who gathered on this hillside, who saw him. Maybe that's where the 500 is. Now, it would make sense that some of them would go, I don't know if I buy it. Maybe they're from Nazareth, from his hometown, and they've never bought it. They've never believed who he is, and no amount of evidence is going to do it. I'm going to show you some quotes for some atheists before we're done here today, that again, it boggles my mind that someone can come this far and not take the next step. Jesus came and said to them, this is him speaking to either just the 11 on a hillside or maybe hundreds. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. This passage is called the Great Co-Mission. It is the mission that we have in community. Who is giving it? Jesus was giving it. But who is he giving it to? Was this just for the 12? And some argue that the only people who were there were the 11, actually. I don't think so. I think there was more there. I think they're meeting with now hundreds of followers there in Galilee. And the truth is, this is for all believers. We're all supposed to do this, not just the very narrow handful of people, especially called to be sent by him. That's what the word apostle means, is sent. And from the New Testament perspective, we really kind of have two definitions. One is just the broad term, sent. Well, any of us can be, of course, we're all sent. We're all fall into this heading. We're all sent to go and make disciples. So in that sense, we're all apostles. But there's a capital A concept of apostles, meaning probably just those who walked and talked and bled and sweat with Jesus, who were actually there getting dirty in the same dirt he was in, who engaged with him physically, and there's a special assignment, maybe special responsibilities given to them. I'm going to skip the last appearance, or one of the last appearances, skip to the last appearance. I'm going to skip the ascension, because I want to make sure I cover this one, and that is to the one who is untimely born. A visitation of Jesus, not just a vision. After this one, all the rest of them are described or portrayed as visions. That it's not literally Jesus physically present with the person. It's a vision of Jesus, but not this one. In 1 Corinthians 15, 8 through 9, the Apostle Paul says this, last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me. For I'm the least of the apostles, unworthy to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. The details of this narrative is found in Acts chapter 9. Now as he went on his way, he approached Damascus, and suddenly a light from heaven shone around him. And falling to the ground, he heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, that was his name before, it was Paul. Why are you persecuting me? And he said, who are you, Lord? And he said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But rise and enter the city, and you'll be told what you are to do. The men who were traveling with him stood speechless, hearing the voice, but seeing no one. The Apostle Paul claims that this is not just a vision, that Jesus came to him, didn't just appear to him physically as in a vision, but literally appeared to him fully present, in his presence, to speak to him, to engage with him. This actual presence of Almighty God is what blinds him, and he has to be healed of it. This is what's going on here. This is what the Apostle Paul claims, is that he was the last one to actually see the physical, risen Jesus Christ. This is probably within a year or two of everybody else's. So now we look at the ascension, which actually happened before Paul, because I think this is key for us. We find this in very short detail here in our book of Luke, where we are. Luke 24, starting in verse 50 is where we will find it. But Luke gives it in more detail in his other book, Acts. So I want us to look there first, in Acts chapter 1, starting in verse 6. And again, look for the Luke humor that you're used to. So there's going to be something about the experience that's going to have a little bit of humor mixed into it, as Luke loves to do, to hold our attention. So when they had come together, they asked him, Lord, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? He said to them, it is not for you to know the times or seasons that the Father has fixed by his own authority. So I got to comment on this. This again, imagine. So again, the disciples, they meet with him, as you're going to see in a minute. It's in Bethany, 2 miles outside of Jerusalem. Where Lazarus and Mary and Martha are from, where the donkey came from, that I love to talk about. And so here you have, he gathers there with them, a couple of miles from Jerusalem, and you can imagine he's now visited with them several times. He's told them they're going to be witnesses. He's told them they're going to go into the world. They're excited to meet with him, so they get it. right? He's gone through Isaiah and Jeremiah and the other prophets, and he's shown them that how the Messiah was going to suffer. Remember, they thought he was going to come and conquer. When he shows up in Jerusalem, like, now it's on, right? This is it, boys. Now we're going to get to see him just kind of lay waste to the Romans. And we're going to get to see the people of Israel become their own people. It's going to be so exciting. And Jesus has to explain to them during and after his death that that's not the case. So you can imagine, now they're there. Okay, we get it. You had to suffer. We understand it. You've taught it to us now several times. And we get that you're dead and that you've been resurrected. Man, that's amazing. It's incredible to see. And then going back to verse 6, Lord, will you at this time restore the kingdom? So surely now it's time, right? Now you're going to actually step up and get rid of the Romans. They're still so fixated on this. Like, this is what our problem is. This is what we need to deal with. And Jesus tells them, because, by the way, this is prophetic. When we get into Isaiah, you're going to see this millennial rule, this rule that where God is going to come physically to earth, and he's going to rule here on earth and a new earth under a new heaven in this new Jerusalem. And that's the picture that's going to be shown to us all through the book of Isaiah. However, Jesus is saying, it's not for you to know when this will happen. The Father has fixed it, starting in verse 8. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the end of the earth. When he had said these things, as they were looking on him, he was lifted up, and a cloud took him out of their sight. And while they were gazing into heaven as he went, behold, 2 men stood by them in white robes. And they said, Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking into heaven? This Jesus who was taken up from you into heaven will come in the same way that you saw him go. Now, we know where this happens because of Luke 24, the last verses. And they led him out as far as Bethany. He led them out as far as Bethany. Lifting up his hands, he blessed them. While he blessed them, he parted from them and was carried into this heaven. And they worshiped him and returned to Jerusalem with great joy and were continually in the temple blessing God. But I want you to see the humor. This is such a great scene. Here, Jesus, they've reappeared several times. And now they're standing with him. He calls them out. They're standing there in Bethany with him. We don't know exactly how many. And Jesus tells them, you're going to be my witnesses. Witnesses. You're going to go tell people what I've done. You're going to tell them about the claims that I have made and how I backed up those claims. That's what a witness is, like in a trial. You're going to be my witnesses, and you're going to do it here, and you're going to do it there, and you're going to do it everywhere. That's the way he says it. And then in the midst of these words, and I always wanted to know the exact timing on how this plays out, at what moment do his feet leave the ground? Like he's standing there talking to him, and at some point he suddenly just starts just ascending into heaven. That we don't know how fast, we don't know how this went, but what we do know is that they gawked, just like we would, right? I don't know about you, but I have watched a balloon for several minutes as it disappeared. It just right, exactly, right, just like that. They watch somebody's flying a little drone, and all of us are standing out there, and all of a sudden there's this. And there's 2 guys standing right there. You know it's the same 2 guys from the tomb. It has to be, right? They're like, man, these people. And so, wait, men of Galilee, why are you staring into the sky? And you can imagine them being like, a guy just rose. He just ascended. That's why we're staring. What do you mean, why are we staring into the sky? And they're like, no, you don't need to look that direction. He gave you a job to do. He told you to go into Jerusalem and be his witnesses. That was a solid 30 seconds ago, and you're still standing here. Why haven't you moved yet? Go do what he told you to do. He gave you a job. Now go get it done. And we looked at last week that that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what they did. But I want you to pick up a couple extra little lessons that stood out to me. 1, they continued to gather and worship in the temple. Now listen, sometimes for us, the tiniest barrier to gathering with believers, it's like the Great Wall of China. We just cannot surpass it. We cannot get over it. If anyone deserved a pass on gathering with the community of believers, you would think it would be these guys. They lived with Jesus for years. They learned from him and they talked with him for years. And here they are, and they still think they need to gather in the community of believers and even of the Jews to worship God together. This is more than just gathering in a big group. They still gathered together. They began to develop what it meant, this concept called the church. In 40 or 50 days from this point, or less than that maybe, by this time they're going to have the Holy Spirit just dumped upon them. They're going to be filled with the Spirit. He's going to seal them. He's going to gift them. He's going to name them. All these different amazing things are going to be part of what it means to be a Christian. We have that same Spirit. That same Spirit has been dropped on us, has been revealed to us. That's how we are able to live out this life. It's why we see parables where other people see nothing. Like we see God working when other people don't see it. The Spirit is illuminating the truth of the world and God to us all the time. That's going to happen. They're going to spread out and they're going to do this. It's really crazy that they do this. For this men and women, understand, for these men and women, this is not some kind of thing they had to trust. They didn't have to hear from someone else on this. They didn't have to read a book. Like I said, they were there. They experienced it or they didn't. They saw him or they didn't, and they know whether they did or not. This is the thing that I want to bring to your attention this morning. This is that reasonable thing. Ready? I want you to imagine, I've done this with the students several times, and I may have even done it in here before, but it's been a long time. I want you to imagine that tomorrow the news media goes out. It is revealed that I, Chris Legg, died on Friday. That's what comes out in the news, right? Hey, Chris Legg, pastor of this church, died on Friday, whatever Friday's date was, right? That he died on Friday. And he died, tragic, well, I'm too old for tragic. I'm not quite yet at the he lived a good life stage but I'm past the tragedy. It's unfortunate, I guess, probably. So he died. And it's unfortunate that he died. And so that's going to be what's communicated. And all of you are going to go, didn't he preach Sunday? Like, I feel sure. And people are going to call each other and they're going to get on Facebook and they're going to be like, didn't he? I thought we saw him preach on Sunday. I'm confident. Wasn't that this Sunday? Didn't he preach? And you're all going to get together and discuss it and be like, no, of course he was. Yeah, he was there. What are they talking about? He didn't die on Friday. He was alive on Sunday morning. And then the media, not only the media, but then the law enforcement come out and they say, no, he died Friday. And in fact, that's the official statement. And anyone who says otherwise risks prosecution. The state, the federal government, it's all going to come down on anyone who claims he was alive on Sunday because he died on Friday. Now, here's the question. You know that I'm here now. You would be like, no, I am 100% sure. I've now asked several other people. We didn't all imagine him. If we did, he would have looked very different, right? We didn't imagine that, just for me, huh? So this is if you imagine, you didn't do that. You know it's real. It's the truth. And the question is, how hard would it be to push you off that truth? How hard would it get you to at least deny it publicly? When they started hitting you with sticks, you would probably be like, fine, he wasn't there. You know what? Whatever you say, officer, that's what we're going with. We're good with that. Maybe when they started hitting your kids. Maybe when they started crucifying your spouse. Maybe when they zeroed out all your bank accounts, took everything you had, and didn't allow you to buy or sell anymore. Maybe that's when you'd go like, listen, you don't have to go to these. No. I'll say whatever you want me to say. We are easy to move off the truth when it costs us. It's not that hard. It's really not that hard. We're quick. Listen, it doesn't matter anyway. Who cares when he died? Friday, Sunday, it doesn't matter. He died. We're good. It's fine. And some people would start some conspiracy websites or that kind of stuff. That'd be it. And everybody would treat him as, whacked out and whatever, because the government's very clear. Like this is what would happen. The vast majority, if not everyone, at the threat of death and destruction would go, no, he's dead. He died on Friday. That's fine. And actually, I hope you would, because it's not worth dying over, right? But that's the truth. And they could probably get 99, if not 100% of us to go, listen, it's not worth the life of my children or the life of my grandchildren. When they start torturing our grandchildren to death, we'll probably tell them what they want to hear. That's for the truth. Now imagine if instead what we said was, hey, you know what? We've still got to pay off this capital campaign. So what would be really cool is if we pretend that Chris raises a dead person to life on a Sunday morning and use that as a fundraising opportunity, right? That we're going to just pretend this somehow. We're going to fake this, and we're all in on it together. We're going to fake this. We're going to pretend like Jesus raises a dead person to life. And the officials show up and say, that didn't really happen, did it? And I really think any blue uniform would be enough for almost all of us to go like, yeah, you're right, it didn't happen, right? I mean, how hard would it be to scare us off a lie? It'd be super easy. I mean, the minute it costs you anything, listen, we're considering investigating, like, no, it didn't happen. Never mind, forget it. It never happened. Sorry, we thought it was funny, or we thought we could no, it never happened. It would be so easy to push us off a lie. Because it's easy to push us off the truth. It's way easier to push us off a lie. The tiniest thing it's going to cost you, you'd go like, no. Here's what's wild. I'm supposed to believe that not only did the kitchen staff come running in here screaming that the kitchen was on fire and it was all about to blow, but they did it knowing that I was going to kill them if they did. That's what I'm supposed to believe? That they would come in and warn about this knowing it was going to cost them their lives to make this warning. And I'm supposed to believe they're lying? I'm supposed to believe, now this is, and by the way, take willful lying out of it for a second. Let's just do pure competency, right? How hard is it to maintain a lie? How hard is it to maintain a secret? How many of you plan surprise parties? And how do those go? Almost every year we have a surprise birthday party for me. I put quotes around it because it's never a surprise. It's not ever. Always one of the guys is like, what time is the party? And I'm like, I'm not supposed to know about it. I mean, it's at 6:30, but I'm not supposed to know about it, right? Every time, 100% of the time. It's impossible to cover a secret. Now what I'm supposed to believe is that people are willing to be beaten to death, their children destroyed and killed, themselves tortured, and they hold on to something that they know isn't true. That's what I'm supposed to believe about these original 11, 12, 50, 500. Is that when they're being boiled alive, they still maintain something that they know is raw lies. I don't believe that. I can't believe, it is unreasonable to ask me to believe that. What does it mean? How does it play out? Yes, this is a conversation for us. What do I come back to when I doubt, when I struggle? When I'm like, why isn't God answering this prayer? Why isn't God doing this thing? I don't understand. It makes no sense to me. I get that. I have those just like you do. But what I come back to in the baseline confidence of that He is the risen Savior is the fact that the other options are completely irrational. I do not believe that hundreds of people for decades of time covered up a lie at the expense of their own lives, at their own estates, that they gave up everything in order to protect a lie that gave them nothing but torture. No, they didn't. I don't buy it. I'm not willing to. It is irrational to do so. So, is there a risen Savior? There is. What does that mean? That's the wrestling match that we all have. What does that mean for us? How do we put our faith in Him? That is great. This did not require any blind faith for them. They either experienced it or they didn't. This is the start of our conversation. So if you will, I would love for you to stand with me. I want us to look at this. This is the truth claim that matters. It's why the gospel's in this way, is to point this out. We work up to this high point. Most biographies end with a death and a funeral. This one ends with a resurrection and a series of teachings and then a commission. That's how this one ends, because the story isn't over. His resurrection is something special. Listen to this. This is a Gert Ludemann, one of the atheistic, he's a professor who's an atheist, a New Testament professor who's an atheist, says this: it may be taken as historically certain that Peter and the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ. That is an atheist. Paula Fredrickson, another well-known atheist historian, says this: I know that in their own terms what they saw was the raised Jesus. That's what they say, and then all the historic evidence we have afterwards attest to their conviction that that's what they saw. I'm not saying that they really did see the raised Jesus. Remember, atheist, I wasn't there. How do you a historian when that's your standard? Like, I wasn't there. Well, you weren't there. Anyway, sorry. I don't know what they saw, but I do know that as a historian, they must have seen something. Bart Ehrman may be the most avid anti-Christian historian out there. It is undisputable that some of the followers of Jesus came to think that he had been raised from the dead, and that something had to have happened to make them think so. Now, in his case, I know why, despite the evidence he doesn't believe. I don't know in the case of the other two. I would love to ask that question of us. And what is it about belief that is our barrier? What is that? For some of you, if you don't know Christ, if you've never put your faith in him, I want you to hear, no one's asking you to believe in some kind of weird hocus pocus, but to believe in the evidence as is rationally laid out, that he lived and he died and he was resurrected. And that means something. He is the Lord. He is the power over life and death. He is who you should call upon. He is the only hope against death. It means a lot more than that too, which can be just like the disciples. We wrestle out through the way we live out following him. But to put your faith in the Lord is step one, to call upon him. If you say, I've done that, I'm not living it out at all, well, now it's time to live a resurrected life, the life of someone who's following Christ. If that's the case, if you're past that, then to ask, like, where am I in my alignment with him, that I put my faith in him in every area, that I understand that as Lord, I need to align myself with him. We're motivated not by fear. That's not what this is, not some kind of behavioral modification, but by gratitude in what he's done and what he's purchased for us, that we can live that out. So this morning, however you need to respond, whatever the Spirit is leading to you, whatever the application in your life is going to be, I would call you to that, to listen to this. What does the resurrection mean in your life? If you would like to come here and pray, there's people here who would love to pray with you. If you've got some of those requests that you've been praying that God's not answering for whatever reason, and you want to gather some other believers to beg him with you, you go right ahead. Come down here and do that. If you just need some time to pray, that's fine yourself. Whatever it is, listen to the Spirit. I would also say this, if you've been through our welcome home process and you're ready to come and join our dysfunctional family, you can come up during this time and let us know, or any other decision that you've made with God. Listen to what the Spirit has for you this morning. I want to close from Paul's writing in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. From now on, therefore, we regard no one according to the flesh. Even though we once regarded Christ according to the flesh, we regard him thus no longer. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. All this is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself. Listen, that's what it means. All this is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That is, in Christ God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them, and entrusting us to the message of reconciliation. Therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. We implore you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. The very words of God.